And we are live. It's a damp, gloomy Thursday afternoon here in Melbourne, but it just got a little bit brighter because I'm joined by Fred Wu. Fred, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And can we just also just shout out the fact that that isn't a AI background behind you? That's actually your house.
It's all real. Yeah, got a real arcade
It
back there.
is. I love it.
Yeah, Neo Geo.
Fred, do you want to just give us a bit of an introduction for anyone who's a heathen and doesn't know you by now?
Mhm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm Fred. So I've been a software engineer for the last, I would say, 2 decades or so. And over the last 10, 12 years, been leading teams of various different sizes. So being a CTO for the last couple of years, doing a lot of, freelancing stuff, open source stuff. So a little bit of all over the place. But yeah, I think, I'm just a sort of a geek and enjoy, geeky things and, technology in general. So
Beautiful, thank you. I think you're underselling yourself a little bit because you've shipped your own products, you've hired engineering teams, you've been the CTO of. We've worked together. You've had the absolute joy and pleasure of sitting next to me in the pod, and you were the CTO for Explore, pretty much from inception all the way through to the sort of the transition. And you've written really frankly about sort of what works and what doesn't. And I'm sort of, I guess, keen to dig into sort of some of your experience and I think there'll be a lot of engineers and founders alike who'll be able to take a lot from your journey. So I think especially those that are sort of building quickly and with small teams and with purpose. So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff there that they can learn, which was why I was keen to have this chat.
yeah, sure.
Perfect. So like let's start again. Start at the beginning. You've sort of started from scratch again and again and building things from the beginning. What is it that keeps pulling you back to early stage and
Mm,
building things from scratch? And what do you learn?
yeah, yeah. I think like a lot of engineers or people with I guess deep curiosity about how things work. Like I'm just curious about things, right? Part of it obviously is about the learning. Like, hey, maybe I get to learn about a new domain, a new product, a new industry, whatever it might be. But ultimately, like especially lately, when I built a couple of small SaaS myself, it was more about I really wanted something to exist. And after a bunch of Google searches, whatever, asked ChatGPT, and I just couldn't find anything that does exactly what I needed to do, right? So then the obvious option is, well, if it's not there, let's invent it, let's build it, and hopefully, if I wanted it, then hopefully, other people will find it resonating and useful as well. So that's the kind of, the I guess the angle. It's like something's not there. Let's make it
Yeah,
real.
yeah. And what do you learn about yourself each time you do it?
I think over the years I've learned that sometimes it's really difficult to find the focus, right? Because we like our brain is stimulated by all sorts of different signals, right?
Hmm.
So I want to learn this new technology, I want to learn this new feature, I want to learn about this and that. But how do you actually, because building a SaaS is not that easy, to be honest. Not just the building part, but the marketing part, talking to your users and etc etc. So you really gotta find your focus and prioritize things so that you can get it out the door rather than, oh, let's keep polishing and
Hmm.
never see the light of day. So to me, I've learned over the years that let's draw down what the scope actually is. As an MVP, let's not go like go big from day one. It's not going to work. Let's start small. Find a niche, find the early customers who will champion the ideas for you, and then let it snowball from there.
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think there's plenty of stories of businesses who've almost gone to the end point too soon, shipped something and they've shown it to users and users go, yeah, that's not what I need, or that doesn't solve a big enough problem, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then that company has
It's,
to
yeah,
rewind
it's
all the way
different.
back.
Yeah, different weapons for different use
Mm,
cases, right? Because if you were under the VC pressure, yes, you have to go big
yeah.
sometimes. But if you're like bootstrapping, then yeah, let's just take a slow, steady pace.
Mm, mm. Um, let's talk about hiring then a little bit, because you've hired obviously as an engineer, not just a leader, and I know you've been hiring teams for over a decade or so. What's changed in how you sort of assess engineering talent now?
Yeah. I think I've made some mistakes, I guess, in the past where I focus a lot on the technical, I guess a person's technical ability,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to be fair, at the time I was, hiring mid-level to senior level devs where, their technical chops are actually really important. But over the years, I recognized that it's not just about their technical ability, it's more about the problem-solving
Mm,
skills and their logical thinking skills. Really, it comes down to, are they logical and creative,
mm,
depending on the role, obviously.
mm,
But to me, I always think about software engineering is not just engineering. It's not just the, I guess, mathematical equations and things like that. There is also a level of creativity involved,
mm,
right? Every time you talk to your colleagues, your bosses, your customers, you learn something, and then you have to use your almost like your intuition to interpret what you've heard, what you've learned as
mm,
well. So there's the combination of, do you have the problem solving skills? Like, if you were presented with a particular problem, what do you do? Do you automatically assume that let's write a script or let's write code? Or do you think about, hey, maybe I can use a spreadsheet or I can talk to somebody
mm,
to have it resolved, right? So this is all about, let's get things done with whatever the resources available to you. That might be tools, that might be time, that might be people, to your disposal to make things happen. So to me, that's very important, especially in a fast-paced or startup
mm.
environment where things can happen all the time, and you're getting like noises coming at you from all sorts of different directions. So how do you actually navigate that and just get things done so you can move on to the next task?
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's also an argument now for engineers probably to be better communicators, particularly in early
Mm,
stage teams, than
yeah.
perhaps they're given credit for, or perhaps the cliche sort of engineer is thought of. Because those cross functional teams that are trying to understand what's the priority next, what do we build?
Yeah.
Again, if you're pre revenue and you don't have a clear path forward, you've all got to be able to
Mm,
communicate really well about what is and isn't possible.
that's right.
Estimates of timeframes to ship things. How quickly can we do this? How quickly can we do that?
Yeah.
So I think that ability to communicate within a cross-functional team now more important than ever.
Yeah, it's paramount. Like, especially, in a lot of startups environment where, because there's this kind of chaotic energy, right?
Mm,
There's a lot of ambiguity around, hey, maybe this requirement is just one or two sentences because maybe the founders just thought of it, maybe it was coming from the customer.
mm,
So how do you actually really dive into, understanding what's actually required? You got to ask questions.
yeah,
You got to talk to people to understand all sorts of different perspectives. So yeah, absolutely. Like communication is always key.
yeah. You've written sort of quite extensively sort of about engineering and startups and that sort of thing. And I think you've written before that most CVs that you see are terrible. What signals do you actually sort of look for when you're hiring, I know, sort of junior to mid level engineers?
Yeah. So, as a hiring manager and, as a recruiter yourself, right? You'll probably sort of resonate with this. Like, we don't spend a lot of time on each CV.
Mm,
So when I was, at Explore and hiring for those roles, I typically spend, 30 seconds, give or take, per CV.
mm,
If there's a cover letter, maybe another 20, 30 seconds. But, if somebody, handing a CV that's like 10, 12 pages long, it's a little bit tricky to really sort of look into those type kind of information density, right? So a lot of terrible CVs I've seen are just keyword matches. Like
mm,
people often put things like Office, Word, Excel, those kind of things on it, which is really useless
mm,
unless you're going for an office admin kind of role. But what I find, interesting is, some of the CVs, some of the better CVs I've seen really have the information density right. So maybe two, 3 pages long, and one or two paragraphs for each role. You don't have to dive really into the details because this is what an interview is for. But it's a conversation starter. Put something interesting on your CV. The impact that you've made or interesting problem that you've solved, things like that. And visually as well, just make it pop slightly, right? Because there's a lot of black and white kind of they optimize for the tools. Yes, some larger organizations will use tools to scan CVs, but you kind of also need to make sure that if you're going for especially startup roles where startups a lot of times won't actually use those tools. They will have somebody like yourself, a recruiter or a hiring manager themselves to look over the CV. And therefore, if I'm looking at hundreds of CVs a day, they all kind of start blending in together. So just make sure that you really want to make your messages across. And one of the ways to do that is by obviously making the information itself interesting, but also visually as well. I'm not talking about fancy graphics or anything like that. But you got to have your headings and have a little bit of visual aids to sort of break the information up a little bit. So that it's not like a one piece on a single page.
Yeah, yeah. Photos or not?
Mm, I'm not too sure. Like photos of themselves, I would say like in Australia, it's probably not a common thing.
Yeah.
I know in certain other cultures or countries, maybe it's known, but yeah, here we
Yeah.
don't usually do that.
No.
But yeah.
I couldn't agree more with everything you've said. I think one of the things that I see a lot as well with CVs is just a list of tasks that somebody's done. And you mentioned like talk about the impact you've had, but again, I think rather than just listing out, I did this, I did this, I did that, and having just 10 dot points that there's no context, there's no meaning to them. Pick three things that were difficult to do, or that were particularly challenging, or that you were just proud of, and give a bit more context and a bit more info there. And I think also some context about the business as well. So rather than having explore and then as your employer and then a bunch of dot points, there's a short paragraph about what explore is, what it does, what the core tech stack was, for example. So yeah, perfect. What are some of the common mistakes then that you see startup founders when they're hiring their first engineer or their first few engineers?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because it's very dynamic, right? And every company, every team's different. Therefore, startup founders they typically are looking for different kind of skill sets or experiences. But one thing I've found is if a founder is overly obsessed with optimizing for cost and cost alone, that tend not to go too well. Like, if their only criteria is let's outsource to the cheapest bidder, right? And, you pay them like what, $10, $20 an hour and you expect to have a working prototype. It's not very realistic in that sense. So I often, when I sort of work with startup founders, like, making the first few hires, I always, sit down with them to really understand what do we actually need? Do we need a problem solver, a generalist, or do we actually want to look for certain specialties, a specialist in certain areas, right? Because that could be, cybersecurity specialists, DevOps, etc. Really understanding what is the requirement. Then let's talk about the constraints. Obviously, there will be a budget constraint. Do we also have a time constraint, either in terms of hiring or in terms of getting certain things done by hiring that new role? And then let's talk about the options. Can we hire locally or remotely? Remotely, there's also challenges as well because, a lot of startup founders, depending on their past experience and sort of their worldview, remote working isn't as easy as some people might make it seem to be, right? You got to have the asynchronous communication depending on the time zone difference. A lot of times, depending on where you hire, there might be language barrier as well. There might be cultural barrier as well. So there's a lot of things to consider before going sort of offshore. Obviously, lately there's the AI part of the equation as well. So that kind of even complicates this more. So there's a lot of kind of variables that we need to make sure that we, it's like doing a mathematical formula. You've got, lots of variables. So you really need to make sure that each variable is correct. Otherwise, the result will, vary like drastically, right? So it's a long-winded way of answering your question, but really it just comes down to let's really find out who we need, who we can afford, and find the best option out of those.
Yeah, is that there's been a sort of growing trend, I think, probably since COVID, of this term fractional, like a fractional CTO, or fractional C-suite. When you have a non-technical founder who's trying to hire that initial team, is that a good way to go, do you think? Having someone like as a part-time CTO, if they can't afford or they're trying to manage their costs, and having a full-time exec doesn't work?
I think it can definitely work, but it comes down to the expectation as well, right? Because fraction by definition is not full time. So you have maybe 10, 20 hours a week to work with somebody. Do you think that's enough? Because a fractional CTO or C-suite, usually they are very experienced, and I've done fractional work before as well. So we tend to be more experienced, and we can actually come in and help you out. But it depends on the founders, I guess, their desire of what do we want to achieve? Do we really want to in the short term to get things in order, have somebody experienced who's been there, done that before, to really help the team to navigate the uncertainty, the chaos, and put some process together to make sure that the team can function on a longer term horizon? Or do we actually want to build a team that capability, and therefore the fractional person could come in more as a coach, right? To coach somebody, to groom somebody within the team to take on that whatever CTO, head of engineering role is, right? So there's a lot of different ways to structure this, but at the end of the day, it's just like what do we want to get out of this engagement? And then
And there's trade-offs for everything, isn't there? I mean, you talk about using overseas resources, the cultural, the language, the time zone differences. What you might benefit in one hand, you're perhaps buying a problem in the other. So
that's right. Yeah, it's always trade-offs, pros and cons. Yeah, exactly.
So how do you manage, I guess, those trade-offs, between speed, quality, sustainability when you're building a startup as a small team?
Yeah. So there's no silver bullet, unfortunately.
Okay.
So, I don't know whether that's a cop-out kind of answer, but it depends, right? So the way I typically think about it is that, especially in let's say an early stage startup where there might already be an MVP, maybe they're working towards an MVP. So in that case, you'll probably need to prioritize the speed slightly above quality. That's not always the case. I'm just sort of generalizing a little bit, right? Because you really want to find your market fit, talk to your potential customers, find out about the market condition, whether there are any competitors, what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. So you really need to I guess, speed up to make sure that you don't waste your time building things perfectly before even knowing whether you're building the right thing, right? So in that case, I would, recommend a founder to let's go fast, right? But that's not necessarily mean that let's just, write spaghetti code to get there. That's not like, because a lot of times, people think in terms of black and white. It's like, oh, it's either speed or quality. Well, why can't you have both, right? It's like you just weigh them up and make the right amount of trade-off to balance them out. So that's how I always think. And in terms of working at any kind of organization, large or small, even for a multinational corporate, there's always opportunities for doing certain things really really fast to trade off the quality a little bit versus, hey, we really need to make sure that we do everything right and set really realistic milestones and deadlines in order to get there. So you kind of have to evaluate on the per project basis or even per task basis.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing that founders and probably CTOs and fractional CTOs need to think about as well is this thing of trying to get to an MVP without just burning everyone out and then killing everyone along the way.
Yeah.
Because once
Yeah.
you find some kind of market fit, and now you're about scaling, and everyone's just burnt out. You're trying to
Yeah.
find this balance of now's our time to scale, but the team have
Yeah.
got technical debt they've accrued. They're all burned out personally. They all need a break. Haven't had a break
Yeah.
in 9 months,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Yeah,
Every organization's got this problem, right?
Yeah.
It's and it's a good problem to have, to be honest, because you're getting to a point where you're getting traction. That's why you now worry about tech debt
Yeah.
and all sorts of things. And yeah, again, it's just because everything's trade-off, everything can be negotiated,
Yeah.
right? Even like deadlines. Before a deadline is communicated to a customer externally, you really need to make sure you've communicated and negotiated internally with your stakeholders to make sure that everybody understands what it means for that milestone to be set and what it means if we can potentially miss that deadline. Are there any negative consequences, right?
Yeah. How do you go about sort of recruiting and convincing people to join your startup when you don't necessarily have a brand, you don't have a big brand name to trade on? How do you do that?
There are several levers you can pull, right? One is the vision and mission. Like, what are you trying to achieve? A lot of startups, kind of talk about changing the world and everything like that. But it really comes down to the problem area that you're focusing on. For instance, personally, I'm very passionate about education and health. So if a startup is working in ed tech or health med tech, that instantly will grab my attention. Everyone's different, obviously, right? But that could be a advantage of, hey, working in a really interesting industry or vertical. The other thing is the technology itself, especially in certain areas where maybe it's about AI or LLM or visual sort of AI, where because we're on the cusp of advancing or transforming certain areas in a massive way, right? Because ChatGPT 3.5 was released only just a few years ago, and now we're at a point where there's Claude, there's Meta, there's a bunch of things happening, right? Open source LLMs. So a lot of technologists like myself, right? We're very interested in seeing, okay, how can we leverage the tools that's seemingly transforming the industry as we speak? How can we leverage that? How can we, really use that to, jumpstart certain functionalities, certain productivity boosts, right? Because the other alternative is you'll get left behind if you're not paying attention, right? So that could be a really good lever to pull for a new startup as well. Working in really interesting, technical solutions. So I think, yeah, a lot of times there's a lot of things that you can brand yourself with. Hey, maybe we are doing certain interesting technology solutions that will need a lot of research to be done. And to the government's credit as well, there's the R&D tax credit as well, right? So to really encourage startups and companies to put the resources into doing research. So I think that in itself could be an interesting way of attracting talents.
I think something that I've noticed as well, whenever I've hired for really early stage businesses, there's a certain engineer I think who's really attracted to the idea of building something from scratch. These things those opportunities are quite rare. Being part of setting an engineering culture, having some freedom to just try things and not being bogged down by this is how we've always done it. The legacy
Exactly, yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, it also circles back to the impact, right? It's like, obviously at a smaller startup, as one of the first engineers, you'll get to make very impactful decisions and sort of the responsibilities that come with it, or the consequences as well. Because if you keep making lots and lots of mistakes, then maybe you'll be running the company into the ground. But, the upside is that, hey, the sky is the limit. You can do all sorts of crazy things to make things happen, which is very, it's very thrilling for a lot of people, right?
Yeah. What do you think engineering leaders like yourself wish that founders knew about software? And I'm talking obviously about non-technical founders.
Yeah. It's not as easy as 1 + 1 = 2. So it's again, like I mentioned before, like it's art and science combined. So there is a level of, hey, we need to write a function. The function has an input and it has an output, so that needs to be correct. And there is a way to verify it by writing unit tests, for example, right? But there is also the fact that, hey, customer A told us about this, customer B said about something completely opposite. What do we do? Right? So there's that human aspect of, okay, so how do we make sure that we're writing a function, it functions correctly, right? The input and output is correct. But in the grand scheme of things, is it making a dent? Is it making an impact, for our customers? Is it solving that problem? So I think for a lot of engineers, like we really need to, almost like put a little bit of a product hat on, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of companies will have dedicated product managers, but that's not to say that, as an engineer, we just write the code,
Yeah.
we just, look at the card and do what it says on the card. Like you need to use your intuition, your skills, your sort of understanding of the world, right? To make an informed decision and make suggestions, talk to, the product team, the design team, sales team, etc., to really come up with the best approach. And that's something that I think, especially a lot of perhaps inexperienced developers lacking, is that kind of awareness of, hey, before you start writing code, can you actually make sure what you're about to build is actually useful?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think more engineers should be on customer calls? When a product manager is doing a discovery call with a customer
Mm,
or a call, do you think
yeah.
more engineers should be on those calls?
I think they definitely should be exposed to a certain degree, because of course, as an engineering leader, I can understand the I guess the opposite side of protecting the team, having them focus on delivering the product rather than having them do all sorts of random things. But it can be organized, right? Because you can maybe set a specific amount of time, maybe on a recurring basis, maybe as a once off. There's always ways to manage that kind of, I guess, extra curriculum for an engineer. But yeah, I definitely think it's helpful. It builds the empathy towards, your customers or, your partners or whoever that you're working for. And yeah, a lot of times, like at Explore, you know this, right? At Explore, we did a lot of that. And personally, I was on the call, making sales calls as well,
Yeah.
cold calling potential customers and getting, hung up and things like that.
Yeah.
It's all like it builds your character, it builds the understanding of, hey, we're working in this vertical. This is how our customers usually, interact with us. This is what they usually talk about. This is what they're usually complaining about.
Yeah.
And then that gives you firsthand experience of, this is how things are like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the learning curve, the potential learning curve for people, particularly junior engineers, and I want to ask you about junior engineers in a minute, but I think the potential learning curve for people in a startups sort of outpaces normal jobs or normal work environments, like dog years. You know,
Yeah.
a previous episode we did with Matt Clements, who was
Yeah.
describing life at an early stage startup like a ghetto MBA, because you just learn so much about everything
Yeah.
at such a fast
Yeah.
pace. What advice would you give to junior engineers that are sort of early in their careers, starting out, and they're particularly in this market? What should they focus on if they're wanting to work in a startup?
Yeah. Um, One is, I would say, be curious. And you can use different words to describe it, passion, curiosity, etc. But really, I do mean it, because if you're just entering this industry uh, because you think it can be cool, you've seen it on TV, hackers doing crazy things, or maybe you thought that, hey, the money is good, or whatever the reason, right? And they themselves could be valid reasons as well. But at the same time, you got to understand that if you don't have enough, passion about what you're about to do, you're not going to last, because there will be so many hurdles a lot of difficulties, whether it's people, whether it's systems, right? That will make you depressed
Yeah.
because then you just simply give up.
Yeah.
So having that kind of mentality going in would be really, really
Mm.
beneficial. And also, like I often, tell juniors that, I'm not trying to instruct them exactly what they need to do, but I often tell them about my own stories. Early on in my own career, I spent so much time working on open source projects and, tinkling on my own projects, because I was like genuinely interested in, solving a lot of problems
Mm.
and understanding and learning about systems and architecture, et cetera, et cetera. And by doing a lot of open source work, the added benefit is that you get to work with different people. Everyone's different, right?
Mm.
So you get to experience with different personalities, how they work with each other, how they communicate with each other, what do they care about when
Yeah.
you issue a pull request, and getting those kind of feedback. It's really, really, it's like a real world learning experience rather than just in a classroom setting, or just going through a tutorial where it's a bit more dry and kind of standard. So I would say, like, just do things, right? And not afraid of making mistakes or making yourself look dumb,
Mm.
because we all have been there. Like,
Yeah.
you got to start from somewhere. So just start.
Mm.
Like, because I often see like questions on, hey, should I use Ruby? Should I use, PHP? Should I use this? Should I use that? Um, like, just pick a lane and stick with it for a little while,
Mm.
because the fundamentals that you learn about a particular language can be translated into other languages or technologies as well, right? Because so yeah, don't obsess too much over what technology, what database do you need to use, what cloud platform do you need to use.
Mm.
Just start learning,
Yeah.
and the rest of it will come later.
Yeah. I think there's so much that engineers early in their career can learn, not just from a technical and a writing lines of code perspective, but about interaction with other people, being able to, as we talked about, prioritize, make decisions about what trade-offs we're comfortable with, what we're not, understanding how the technology that they're building impacts a real human being. I think it's
Yeah.
really easy for for engineers to get divorced almost from this concept of it's just a line of code in some production to me, but it actually impacts a
Mhm.
human.
That's right. Yeah.
And then I think when you tie that into your comment about you're particularly interested in medtech and edtech, then if your heart is particularly close to an area, every line of code you write has more of an impact and more feels for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
perfect.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of time. Before we go, what's the impact of AI going to be on engineering teams?
Very good question. There's so much have happened in the past, 2, 3 years or
Mm.
so, especially in large language models. But I think I don't want to speculate too much, because it is a very kind of, things are moving very quickly at the moment. All I can say is you need to pay attention as a developer. Even if you've tried it, you've decided that no, this is not for me. I
Mm.
think I can write code, much better and more efficiently than our AIs can. That's okay. And but you need to pay attention to it. You need to not let yourself be in a sort of silo and kind of almost like intentionally block out that side of the
Mm.
equation,
Mm.
because you think that, oh, AI is bad, therefore I don't want to know about it. That in itself could be a problem, because if you're not sort of moving fast enough, other people will. Therefore, you'll be left behind. And again, like, I'm not speculating anything on the AI capability itself, but we can kind of draw some parallels from the past events, like when people started writing code, we used text editors, and that became IDEs, or code editors with a lot of integration, autocomplete functionality, syntax highlights, etc.,
Mm.
to really aid the development. So the way I think about it is that if you can use AI to aid your development productivity, that's a plus, right? It doesn't necessarily need to write all the code for
Mm.
you, but it can be a tool that you bounce ideas off with. You ask ask about the questions. Because personally, I a lot of times use AIs to when I get handed a brand new code base, right? Something that I have to inherit. So instead of looking through thousands of files myself, I'll ask AI, hey, just do a deep dive, give me a summary, give me a starting point,
Yeah.
and then I can follow the threads myself. So that could be a good use case, right?
Yeah.
So it's more about just finding the good use cases that can actually help you, and then go from there.
Perfect. Fred, again, mindful of time. This has been brilliant. Thank you so much. I'll include links so if people want to find you or look at your blogs or look at your other SaaSes that you're building, Pursue Me and Riz Farm, and what's the bun one?
Feed bun.
Feed bun. People can find those and comment and use them. Thank you so much, my friend. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great chat.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, see ya.